We inhabit the Earth alongside a vast array of life, nearly 9 million species. During Earth's history, plants and animal species have emerged, gone extinct, differentiated, and adapted to changing environments. And it all can be mapped on the tree of life. There are people, plants, animals, fungi, unicellular organisms, multicellular organisms, maybe viruses, and it all is somehow related. But how? Using DNA, life's code, scientists can now probe deeply into the history of organisms and reconstruct the historical map of life's evolution. These maps are phylogenetic trees. The notion of some sort of connectedness between all life is ancient. People once imagined life strived to become higher forms, up the great chain of being. But the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species aggressively launched the world into concrete ways of classifying life with phylogenetic trees. It has been more than 150 years, and modern techniques and data continue to confirm Darwin's idea. So how are all of the organisms related to one another? No single scientist can answer this alone, so people specialize in groups and are working to piece together the tree of life, a phylogenetic tree that tells the long and complicated history of life on Earth. In order to build or create a phylogenetic tree, a researcher must collect many points of data, and Ted Schultz uses them to reconstruct the past.
I started out with a really simple question, and I constantly return to that question, which is, how did the fungus growing behavior originate? How did it evolve? So it's a historical question. It's not sort of something that's repeatable or something we can repeat in the lab. It's a historical event that we're trying to reconstruct.
When Darwin first started talking about evolution and proposed all of his original theories, people looked at it as almost a linear kind of a operation. You have this, it develops into that. Now we know that it's far more complicated. And so what happens with a tree is it lets you sort that out.
We're not just looking at a single thread that weaves through the entire story of going in step by step toward us, but rather we come to understand that the adaptations, the ways of life of the early ancestors at 1 million years ago, at 1.5 million years ago, at 2 million years ago, and so on, back through time, actually were successful for their own reasons, not because they were becoming like us.
I just get a lot of satisfaction out of running computer algorithms and solving problems, analyzing data and coming up with results and seeing those results for the first time.
It is clear that phylogenetic trees are a powerful tool to visualize evolution. But what exactly is a phylogenetic tree? What animal is this? It looks like a snake. It has a long body, is legless, and would slither if we saw it moving. But it's a lizard. What makes it a lizard rather than a snake? And how do biologists categorize all the countless numbers of species on the Earth? Scientists organize life with phylogenies. These diagrams are designed to show which organisms are most closely related based on their common ancestry. It operates on the basis that all life originated from a common ancestor and traces the history. North America has many types of carnivores and is home to 4 types of cats. If we look at the characters of these 4 cats, we can build a diagram of who is most closely related to whom. The characters may be morphological, like fur, a spine, or horns, or microscopic, like DNA sequences or whole genomes. it is up to the scientist to sort which of the many characters best distinguishes the groups. While closely related species tend to look very similar and share most of their genes, the trees are not constructed based on similarity of looks because similar environments often yield similar adaptations. So once a scientist has created a tree, what do they see? Every tree has the same basic structure. It references only the individuals or organisms sampled and where they last had a common ancestor. Differently shaped trees emphasize different types of questions. Some look at one or more groups. Some lengths of branches indicate genetic changes and differences between the groups. Some are rooted and show a common ancestor. Others are not and only show the relationship between the presented groups. Trees are a diagram of a question. The big question behind every tree is a hypothesis of evolutionary relationships, and for researchers like Ted, the culmination of all their work.
So this is an evolutionary tree of the fungus-growing ants based on 4 nuclear gene sequences. At the tips of the branches are species that live today. Each one of these was collected somewhere in North, Central, or South America. And in fact, this is a chronogram. It's calibrated in years. And so this is 10 million years, 20 million years. And the common ancestor of all the fungus-growing ants lived about 50 million years ago, according to this. What this is a big story. It's a lot of collecting of ants, a lot of sequencing of DNA, a lot of computing, and the story in this case is the history of how the fungus-growing ants originated and how they evolved.
I would say that phylogenetic trees, to me, are sort of the basis of everything that we do. I mean, many of us like to call it tree thinking. So that when you look at a problem or you look at a question, you're looking at how is a tree going to help me answer that question. And some people joke about, oh, another tree. But in reality, if you have a framework, it allows you to ask much more specific questions. And one of the things you find in science is that the more specific your question is, the easier it is to show that it's wrong. Going out in the field is what really got me interested in biology to start with. I went to a field station at the university one summer and I thought, wow, you can actually think of an idea, you can set up a way to investigate it, find out an answer to what you're asking, and then think of another idea. It's just perfect. Of course, nobody tells you in the beginning that there's another step in there in between think of an idea and do the research, and it's called funding. Well, we have 2 species out here that we know of. We have Melanthera integrifolia here, and then up on the hillside we have Lipoccheta lobata. And then in the middle, on the lower slopes, we have what we think are hybrids. So we're trying to find out if this is one parent and that's another parent up there, then we have to look at what's in between, and we want to get seeds from all of them so we can perhaps do chromosome counts. So I'm actually working on a big project right now on the composity of the Pacific, and I'm trying to find out every group of composity in the Pacific, where it came from, how old it is, how it diversified. So everything in this family has a receptacle with many small flowers on it instead of having individual flowers like you think of for most plants. And each one of these little dark spots here is a completely separate flower. So this arrangement of having many small flowers on the surface in the center and then many larger flowers around the outside is characteristic of the family, and it's one of the things that allows us to identify them. So you'll always know a composite when you see one. One of the things many people don't understand is how far the Hawaiian Islands are from anything. They're about 3,700 kilometers from California, 3,500 kilometers from the Marquesas Islands, and 6,000 to 8,000 kilometers from Japan. they're so far away from all the sources for plants that once something gets there, it often, if it can survive, it often finds a lot of empty space to develop into, and you get a lot of these amazing radiations. We can date the arrival in the Hawaiian Islands based on the phylogeny.
But fungus-growing ants differ from other ants in a really remarkable, essential way, and that is because they have evolved the ability to grow their own food. If they don't have their fungus gardens, they die. Farming has originated in the animal kingdom very few times, and I don't know why, but the path from being a hunter-gatherer to being a farmer that's dependent on your crops is a fairly complicated path. I think by any measure, leaf-cutting ants are incredibly successful animals. They are, many people don't realize this, the dominant herbivores of the New World tropics. They harvest more fresh vegetation in the New World tropics than any other animal group. It's been estimated, in fact, that they take something like 15 to 20% of all the fresh vegetation that grows in the wet New World tropics.
We can never really have a time machine that goes back and allows us to see how different species arose in their point in time, or when they did arise for the first time. But we do have some indication of the context, that is, the environments that may have been very, very important in producing new species. One of the basic theoretical foundations of understanding the process of the origin of species is that populations can become separated, and by virtue of becoming separated, that they then start to have an independent evolutionary history, different survival challenges in those different places where they ended up on the ancient landscapes of Africa. Well, one of the things that we know from understanding the enormous variability of environments over time, the tremendous fluctuations between dry and wet, is that the African woodlands and forests and savannas would become coalesced into large swaths of habitats and then divided up into patches. And so we have a chance to look at, through looking at environmental history of Africa, how there were times when when populations would have been drawn apart into habitats that were their favorite habitats, but more patchily distributed across the landscape. That's the first condition where you get isolation of populations and the beginning of speciation. It's when they come back together, when the environment changes again, that it's a test. Has there been enough genetic change whereby they do not interbreed and thus maintain a separate course of evolution? And if so, we have one species becoming two.
Well, it's not unusual for closely related things to be able to hybridize in plants. The zoologists get all freaked out over it. Yeah. Oh, it's not a good species if it can but of course in plants it's much easier. Yeah. If they get isolated spatially, there's no selection pressure for them to get isolated sexually. So if they're on a different island, the chances they're going to develop some kind of physical sexual selection is slim, because they don't need to. And if they ever come back in contact with one another, they're still fertile because they never developed any barriers. But botanists are never worked up over hybrids. Because by trying to build trees, we find conflicting trees, and sometimes that means there's different signals in the data, which means there are different answers to your question. And so what happens with a tree is it lets you sort that out, because you've got a branching diagram, you have two sister taxa, but you also have conflicting positions for that taxonomy. The zoologists think that plants are crazy. They're used to, when you think about it, they're used to a very simple system. You have a male, you have a female, you have a progeny. Plants will break, their chromosome pieces will break off, float around, attach somewhere else, you know, and then the other piece that's supposed to go with it just sort of attaches this way and then it hangs down that way. And they just do all these amazing things because they don't have to follow those rules that animals do. So it's pretty cool. Once you explain it to zoologists, they think it's really cool. But in the beginning, they think it's outrageous and that they can't possibly be good species. But anyway, let's see if we can, this looks like a pretty good place to go up, what do you think?
Probably wander up.
Up to those rocks up there?
Yeah.
All right. You go first, you're young and agile.
So this is the wrong one?
This is lobata, this is the right one. Oh, but look behind you, look at this tiny headed one. It's hard to tell whether this is variation or some type of hybrid, but it looks probably like it's just variation. And now look at the difference in the leaves. See how these are thick and these are thin? This one tends to grow along the coast on the sand and rock. This one tends to grow on the slopes, the rocky slopes. So here is a place where they meet. You have the integrifolia and you have the lobata. And earlier this year we thought we saw several hybrids, but for the last 4 weeks we haven't been able to find any hybrids. So we think that they don't persist in nature very long.
So what we're trying to do in understanding human phylogeny is identifying the cast of characters and understanding their relationships to one another. I would describe myself as a time traveler. That's what I feel that I do in my work. So that means that I have teams of geologists, environmental scientists, paleontologists, archaeologists, all those people who will have an interest in the ancient environments and the fossils that tell us the story of us. Communicating human evolution is such an important medium for understanding, for public understanding. I think the way that, with my interest in not only phylogeny, but also the environments and the major changes in stone technology and how early humans interacted with their environment, that putting all that together in a single diagram is really a challenge, but it's fun.
What you really want out of a tree is for it to have a predictive power. To be able to say, based on this tree, I think the following happened. And I think the following probably will happen. I think whenever you're faced with a problem, if you're sort of a tree thinking kind of a person, you back up and you look at where's the point where there wasn't a problem. And then you move, you say, well, okay, then what's causing this and how far do I have to go before it's not a problem, and then how do I get around, what it is that I'm thinking. So you begin to think of all things having a common origin at some point, and working your way back until you get to that point can sometimes be very instructive. It's almost like trying to find your car keys, Where did you leave them? Well, everybody says the same stupid thing. Where did you have them last? Well, if I knew that, I would, Because when you're not getting the answer, when you can't answer something, you're probably asking the wrong question. So you back up and you ask a different question, and then maybe you're going to get the right answer. You're going to be able to find the answer. So anytime my husband and I have a discussion about something and we can't figure out the answer, we laugh, we say that, and then we back up and we try and figure out what's the point that we can start on.
When I was just starting out, and as a undergraduate and then as a graduate student, I was searching for my niche and the frontier that I would decide I wanted to devote myself to. And there were a lot of possibilities, but the one I kept coming back to was fungus growing ants. And I was lucky enough to join together in a collaboration with 3 other people, and it was early days. when molecular phylogenetics was pretty new. And we had a phylogeny for the fungus-growing ants, and we had the first molecular phylogeny, in fact, the first phylogeny of any kind, for the fungi that the ants grow. And I remember we had the ant phylogeny first, and when we took a first look at the very first fungal phylogeny and juxtaposed it with the ant phylogeny and saw how things matched up or didn't match up, that was a thrill. All of us, I think, started whooping and hollering and jumping around the room, because it really did, there was a pattern. There was a very clear pattern, and we all immediately recognized it. And it's moments like that that in general make you realize, hey, these methods actually work. They're eliciting patterns in nature that we could have never known about prior to having these methods.
I mean, one of the things about science is it's not just about what you think. It's about what you can show people that you have done, that they could then go out and under the same circumstances come to the same conclusion. And it gives young people, I think, a real incentive for going out there and challenging some of the things that have been around for a long time, because they can do it. They don't have to study the group for 25 years to learn about it. They can go out and spend a couple of years getting some really good data that can really test hypotheses. Because in science, there's always somebody with another idea different from yours.
Yeah, you know, one of the things about science is that it exposes our ignorance. And that's a very, very important thing, to understand what we don't know. And what's key is figuring out, well, what is knowable, and trying to distinguish that from things that are always going to be a little bit hard to know for sure.
I actually have to say, it's not just getting the answer. I mean, that's really important. But what you also get when you get the answer is you get lots of new questions. So what you never really solve something completely. All you do is answer one question and generate a half a dozen more.
There'll never be a moment where I feel like, okay, I answered that question, you know, I completely answered that. And so I've just gotten used to that, and actually I think that's just kind of the story of life, and I wouldn't want to have it any other way.
The number of questions facing scientists is ever increasing, and the revolution of technology is moving people to further explore. That is why phylogenetic trees change and morph with new information. While the mysteries of the inner workings of life are examined, we as people can continue to marvel upon all the unique forms of life. In Darwin's famous Origin of Species, he writes, "It is interesting to contemplate an entangled bank, clothed with many plants of many kinds, with birds singing in the bushes, with various insects flitting about, and with worms crawling through the damp earth, and to reflect on these elaborately constructed forms, so different from one another, and dependent on one another, in so complex a manner, have all been produced by the laws acting around us." There is a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having originally been breathed into a few forms, or into one, and this whilst the planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity. From so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved.
I always wanted to go out and play baseball or football or something like that, but I have an older brother who's 5.5 years older, and he's a born teacher. And he would say, okay, yeah, we'll go out and play soon, Rick, but let me tell you what I learned about the origin of the solar system.
I like live animals, and I've always kept live animals. When I was a kid, I used to keep lizards and frogs and salamanders, and I used to go out and catch insects and try to keep them alive too.
I'm a botanist. I love working with plants. I love looking at plants. So every once in a while, I just have to stop all this other stuff and sit down and look at plants.